Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to another episode of the Coaching Outdoors podcast. Today, we actually are an international podcast. I am in Scotland as usual, and Anna is down in the southwest of England. And we're joined today by Lisa Partridge, who's in Singapore, which is a beautiful, beautiful country in a beautiful part of the world. Lisa, could I ask you to introduce yourselves briefly to our listeners?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for inviting me on. I'm Lisa Partridge, the founder of SIXCOMMS and a host of a walk and talk community here in Singapore. I'm a communication skills specialist, and I do online courses face to face. I design and facilitate workshops here in Singapore and in the Asian region, and I host a weekly walk and talk with a thriving community of, I think there's last count over 100 walkers in the WhatsApp group.
Welcome, Lisa. So pleased to have you on the podcast. We've been watching your walk and talk events over the last couple of years with interest, and we've been so wanting to get a podcast guest in from Southeast Asia as well. So we're really, really excited to have you on the podcast today, and kickstarting with the question that we ask all of our guests, just to set the scene and to get a little insight into your backstory. We always pose the questions. There's two kind of back to back, piggybacking a little bit. So the first up is, what is your earliest memory of being outdoors? And then, why do you love the outdoors so much?
Okay, so my earliest memory, um, consistent memory, I would say, in connecting with nature is where in the house I grew up. Actually, it was a very nice detached house, and I lived in a cul-de-sac. So there was like four other houses in this cul-de-sac, and in a semicircle. And right in the center, in front of my house, was a beautiful big oak tree. So if you took a photo of it, it would be, you could imagine that image on the cover of a fairy tale. It was just beautiful. And of course, the oak tree doesn't always have acorns, so it's very seasonal. So I saw all the changes throughout the season. But because it was central in our cul-de-sac, all the other children from the neighborhood would congregate around the acorn tree. So I suppose my fondest memories were being out there with the other children, with my friends, with my brother, with my parents, and mostly my mum, because my dad would work a lot. So my mum would be the one that would be at home more. And I remember making acorn like characters with her. So we'd get like cocktail sticks and we'd pick up all the acorns and we'd make this wonderful imaginary world together. Um, and so it was just, for me, it just represents community, it represents love, it represents neighborhood. And I just feel really happy. I always smile when I remember back to those times, because it was a lot of play and it was a lot of fun and just tapping into our imaginations. So yeah, that really resonates with me when I think back to my earliest memory of nature. And now I've forgotten your second question.
And then the second one, I think you almost started to touch on it naturally, to be honest, talking about community and love and the neighborhood. Um, They'll offer it again. Why do you love the outdoors so much?
Yeah, I suppose it must come from that. I suppose when I think of nature, I think of playing in the garden with my brother. I think of going to the local farm and being among all the animals and spending summers. There was a holiday program in this local farm that we always used to go to, and we were able to adopt a piglet for a week. And so I just remember those happy times. And whether we were in the farm, whether we were out in the garden, whether we were cycling with my parents, it was always during happy times. And I also have half my family. So I'm originally from Essex in the southeast, but my uncle, my brother, my dad's brother and his family, so all my cousins actually live in North Yorkshire. So we would alternate. So one Christmas they would come down south, the next Christmas we'd go up north. So I have very fond memories of being in the Yorkshire Dales. I remember family get-togethers in the Lake District in Cumbria. I remember as a child going to my mum's favourite village, which is a little village called Beer in the southwest. And she spent lots of happy summers there because she had an auntie that lived there. And so every time I think of nature, I just have very fond childhood memories of gatherings and just playing and tapping, as I say, into that imagination.
Such a rich sort of imagery that you're painting there. Very, and it really kind of touched me because it's quite similar for me as well. Well, I don't have a big family at all, but everything around family was around nature, and we'd spend so much time together outdoors, and just exploring the world. And it's fascinating you talked about the oak tree as well, because Anna and I we have huge affinity to trees in general, but oak trees especially. And we actually have a previous podcast guest, and I don't know if you've ever heard of the book. It's called The Oak Papers, and it's by a gentleman called James Canton. So if any of our listeners are also have an affinity for oak trees, his podcast is wonderful. And he's not a coach at all. He's actually a professor at a university, but he spent a year with a oak tree and just with it throughout the seasons, and just with the way you described it there, Lisa, it just really reminded me of his book. So he was there through all the different seasons, different times of the day, different weather, all that sort of stuff, and it just makes you kind of connect in a way that's very different to just being indoors. So thank you for that really lovely sort of insight into your background with nature and your kind of childhood connection there. Sort of bringing that into the more kind of recent past, I suppose, is a way of putting it. Um, can you give us a sort of an example or an insight into how you got to where you are now? So as we said, you're in Singapore, so from Essex to Singapore, and how have you ended up with the kind of focus on the communication side of things and the walk and talk? So just a snippet of how you got to where you are, because obviously we'll go into detail about the things that you do.
Yeah. So when I graduated from university, I knew I wanted to teach and I wanted to travel. I think travel came first and the teach came second. But in order to travel, I needed to make money in order to go and see all the places I wanted to see. So I actually started out teaching English as a foreign language. So that's how I initially got out to Asia. So my first 2 years of work were in Japan, in a small town at the foot of Mount Fuji. So I was lucky enough to climb Mount Fuji and reach the summit. On the way down, I lost a big toenail, but that's another story. But that was like my introduction into Asia, and after that, I just kind of had the travel bug and went back home for a little while to do a teaching qualification. Then ended up teaching in Italy, Germany, and then back to London. And then in 2009, um, my husband and I had an opportunity to come and work in Singapore. Well, my husband had the opportunity, and I was quite happy to kind of follow him. Um, and yeah, so back in 2009, the only other experience I'd had in Asia was in Japan. So I was naively thinking that Singapore would be like Japan. It definitely isn't. Um, and we thought, okay, let's go there. It was the credit crunch at the time, so we were working in London. It wasn't particularly a great climate. We thought it would be a great opportunity, and we kind of said to each other, if we don't like it, the worst that can happen is we go back. And yeah, that was 2009, and we haven't gone back. So we've had our three children here, and we're very much settled, and this is what we call home. And I find it quite interesting when I talk to other people and I say I'm living in Singapore, because they don't necessarily associate nature or green with Singapore. A lot of the time they just think of it as a cityscape, like a stopover that you kind of stay for a little bit and then you go onwards to Australia. But it really was in COVID, I suppose, when that privilege of going outside gets taken away from you, that you start to appreciate the outside space so much more. And I think it became a little bit of my mission to kind of rediscover and reconnect with the greener parts of the city that I call home, but I don't necessarily connect with so intimately. So that's when I kind of rediscovered the nature of Singapore and fell in love with the parks here, and just discovering little gems that even though, 10 plus years I hadn't really properly discovered. So that's when I kind of fell back in love with the nature. Yeah.
And it's that nature is everywhere. We are nature, and that nature of being born in the UK and then nature living in Singapore, it's how do we see it? How do we really connect to it? And COVID was a really interesting time that kind of gave us opportunity and was so difficult to navigate for some people as well. And just hearing your story there really reminds me of that time for me down in Wiltshire. I'm not from the southwest, and for me, travel has been a big part of my life, having lived in the Middle East, in Australia. And it was okay, what's on your doorstep? What are the unknown little nooks and crannies? And my partner's from the locality, and yet I would be off hunting places that he'd never even heard of or been to. So I just really do think it's this beauty of like what is on your doorstep and bringing it back and heading out. And so having lived through COVID and rediscovered nature, then what inspired you to start your regular walk and talk events?
Yeah. So during that time, like the tail end of COVID, I would say, it came to a point where I had to make a decision. So for a while, I'd been thinking about leaving my previous organization and starting on my own. And then I suppose what happened in COVID and the fact that we had to say goodbye to so many people, in terms of them having to relocate back to their home countries, um, I was like, do I really want to stay on, or do I want to make a go of it of my own? And so I decided I'm going to just go out on my own. Actually, before leaving London, I was running my own business. So I'd had kind of some experience of that. So I thought, yeah, this is a good time to do it. If not now, when kind of situation. Um, and I was finding, okay, I've had this organization and I've had a team around me, and now a lot of them have left. Um, I'm on my own, and I was kind of sat in this room looking around thinking, okay, the reality is that I've got to go out and start networking and connect and build essentially a team around me from scratch, or at least have a support network. And I was going to these networking events. There's lots of groups here. I was turning up in rooms, and it was all very structured, and I just hated it. I was getting really tired of it. And I wouldn't say in my childhood I was very shy, but it's funny that introvert extrovert thing. I sit somewhere in the middle, and I'm not sure whether I've kind of developed that as because of my job, but I found I was getting smaller and smaller and quieter and quieter. And I'm not sure whether that also was because of us being in COVID. I just wasn't having that connection so much. I just felt like I wasn't myself. And when I wasn't myself, I felt like I was selling, but in a not nice way. Like you've got 60 seconds to pitch what you do. And I was like, oh, I don't want to do that. That feels wrong. That feels uncomfortable. I want to connect. I want to have those deeper conversations. And I don't want it to always just be for something, to get something out of somebody. So I was really struggling with that. I was finding my energy levels were depleting. And I have 3 young children as well. So I've got to be really conscious of my energy levels. And I thought, what was I doing in COVID that was like making me feel good? And every Wednesday, I got into this routine of going out to my local reservoir and just walking around it. At a good pace, it would take about 40 minutes to do one lap. So I went out again and I thought, oh, let's keep doing this. Because when I was doing it, I was also listening to podcasts, and I was also planning what I would like to do and maybe start my own, and I'm getting inspired. And I always came back from there feeling energized and really ready to get on with my work. Um, and then I started to invite just casually friends or people that got in touch with me out for a walk. And I was just finding in those 40 minutes, we might have just met online. So it might have just been a LinkedIn connection. But in those 40 minutes, I would feel so much more connected to that person than I ever did when I was doing all of these networking groups. And I was actually enjoying it and having really nice conversations. So I thought, oh, there's something in this. And one of the ladies that I walked with lived quite local to me and said, oh, this is a perfect way of getting my cold LinkedIn connections warm. And I've been looking for something like this. And so I remembered it just stuck with me. I thought, oh, maybe there's something in that. So every Wednesday, I made it a habit of walking around the reservoir. And when I got the opportunity, I'd invite people. And this went on for quite some time until I started to explore different locations. So I would go somewhere else. I'd go to another park that was a little bit more outside of my local neighborhood. And on one walk, a friend, Maria, said to me, you've been doing this for a while now. Like, what are you going to do with it? And I was like, well, that'll be like maybe a handful of people in a WhatsApp group, and we'll rotate the locations. It will just be a nice social thing, and it will give me some exercise regularly. And that's really genuinely how I answered. Well, anyway, fast forward 6 months, 8 months. And I would say really seriously, the beginning of this year, it's now a non-negotiable. It's like it's my top of the funnel, get to know me, get to know about what I do. And as I say, it's a WhatsApp group and there's over 100. I mean, just before this call, I had someone message me asking me when the next walk is. And pretty much 2, 3 times a week, every week, I'm getting somebody contacting me about it. So it's just a very popular, easy, authentic way to connect with people.
It's amazing, isn't it, how something that is so like something that you have created for yourself and then shared with others because you found benefit from it, and then you've shared with others in case they might find benefit from it, and it just organically grows like that, doesn't it? And the pace at which these things can take off, I mean, I think the fact that you've shared that with others and then taken on board them saying, this is really good, what are you going to do with it, and thinking about how you can make it a regular like you said, a non-negotiable. I love that as well, because it really is one of those things as well. If it's what makes you happy, what makes you, energizes you, etc., then it will probably do the same for others, and giving other people the opportunity to get involved. And we find the same over here in the UK. There's a lot of walk and talk groups. Anna runs one with a friend, and they really are gaining a lot of support and excitement, because people are really starting to realize, that connection, and not just the connection, but the connection in nature, walking around, being outdoors. So going a little bit more into the detail of your walk and talks, can you describe what sort of happens on your walk and talk events? Is there a structure to them? How do you actually sort of run these events, and what do you talk about?
Yeah. It's been an experiment, I'll say that. It's it's evolved, and I've tried different things, and but now I would say there's quite a nice little container. I don't like it to be too strict, because then people get stiff and it feels too much like an indoor structured event, which I don't enjoy. So I guess that there are people that don't enjoy that as well. So at the beginning, I get into a circle, I gather people in a circle. I've learned that I need to clearly identify myself, because I was finding that if I didn't know people and it was the first time, I wouldn't necessarily know what they look like. So I would kind of be wandering around aimlessly, like checking if somebody was signed up to the walk and talk. So now I have like a clipboard that clearly marks that this is a walk and talk. So people kind of come to me and I don't have to search them out. So yeah, I form a circle. It's just a very informal way to introduce. So I think it's important that everybody has a chance to say their name, but I don't like too much like structure, if you see what I mean. So it's just hi, I'm Lisa, I'm the host. We're going to walk for an hour. I noticed that there are some really familiar faces, but there are some first time walkers here. Just give, share your name, and just maybe one or two ideas that I give them of things that they could share. And then it just goes round the circle, and people are generally okay to do that. And then I set a bit of like guidance on what to expect. So we're going to be walking for an hour. Don't worry about the route. I'm going to lead you. You'll organically just fall into pairs or trios, which is usually what happens. And then I have on I have on the clipboard a sign that says change in bold letters, because I was getting feedback after the hour of people coming up to me saying, "Oh, it's been really great, but I haven't spoken to so and so. I got involved in one conversation and I didn't have a chance to speak to them." So I kind of monitor it, and then I hold up the sign so that people can change their partners. And then halfway through, we pause around the 30-minute mark, and I often have a pack of conversation question cards with me. And I hand out those question cards, and then they repair with a new partner and answer those questions, which generally goes into something quite a deeper level. And introverts love that, the quieter members, because it gives them something to anchor their conversation around. And then at the end, so it's an hour, we gather. We sometimes, if there's time, share some of the insights or the surprising information, or the topics that have been discussed as a whole group. We have a group photo, and then optional drink afterwards. Yes, that's generally the structure around it.
And it's that balance between structure and then space to flow, how much support. And there it was something that when I was setting up the networking in Southwest, I had a co-networking partner, and we would very much have a theme for the net walk. And that was usually a topic that we'd been kind of chewing over within our business. So it might be something around business development or social media or money. So we then unpack that with a few questions. Clearly, as a coach, love questions. And they would then be offered to the group. And whether people use them, brilliant. If they don't, brilliant. They're kind of, as you say, with the conversation cards, it gives an a nugget, a connection point to start a conversation with. And yeah, the networking events that we used to run in Bath, Bradford-on-Avon, Devizes, it's really kind of bringing people together. And it's really heartening to see how many networking or walk and talk events are emerging. And if you used to Google networking back in 2015, there was one guy in Edinburgh, he had a Facebook group, but it wasn't like live. And other than that, there was nothing. Whereas now there's a real surgence of that. And I think it's a really interesting way to to share about yourself and also about your business and connect within a local area, which particularly, kind of coaches who are listening in or who might be kind of setting up on their own, it is that, well, as you talk about being part of an organization and now I'm on my own and like, oh my goodness, what's the support network? How do I kind of connect and meet people? And I totally hear your horror at being in networking events. Similar experience with often like just horrible fried breakfast or kind of lukewarm white wine, and like it's bleary, it's 7:30 in the morning. Like my own company's more than enough than anyone else's, and then after work I'm like, well, I'm done for the day, or I want to go training, or I want to have time on my own. So it's a really interesting, that kind of time of day, how do you fit it? So partly we wanted to get you on to share was as a possibility for other coaches, like what could they do? And clearly coaching outdoors one-on-one is very different to the group management side of things, so it'll be interesting to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But first, more insights into your walk and talks and what you've noticed with your participants. Our listeners love examples, so clearly confidentiality fully respected. If there's any kind of benefits that you've noticed, that would be really great to hear.
I think the overall benefit, and it's been very humbling and amazing to experience, is just the ripple effect of these walk and talks, because after each one, we genuinely feel very bonded. It's difficult to describe actually, unless you have experienced it, but I just feel like if we hadn't met each other before, we feel like we know each other. And it's like just such a memorable time that it just doesn't easily get forgotten. It sticks. You know, there was one walk that I can recall that was so special. We were just on my local reservoir, and we went halfway round, and it was getting really dark and very cloudy. And I was thinking, oh, okay, the heavens are going to open up. And here we have really bad, like thunderstorms. So it's thunder and lightning. And I was thinking, oh, I don't know whether we're going to make it. But I thought, no, I'm just going to hang tight. We're nearly there. Anyway, it kind of started to move to the other side. So as we were walking, the clouds were shifting, and we came towards the end, and I was thinking, oh, we just got 5 more minutes to go. If it just hangs on, we'll be all right. It started to drizzle. So it wasn't torrential yet. So I was still okay. And I was near an area that was sheltered. So I was thinking, I think we can make it. Just try and get the group photo in before everybody has to go off. As we turned round to form the group for the photo, a rainbow came over us and it just framed the picture. And there were walkers on there that I knew. There were walkers on there that I'd maybe met once before, and there were brand new walkers. And the fact that we took that photo, it was shared in the group, and we talked about it like many weeks afterwards. Just the timing and the fact that if I had decided to turn back, we wouldn't have had that moment together. So it was just really special. So I think there are moments like that that happen that really bond people. Um, and as I said, the ripple effect has been incredible. So I don't always know who are connecting after the walk separately. But what I hear sometimes is that people have really connected and they've taken to scheduling a meeting together on their own away from the walk and talk, and that's led to podcast collaborations, that's led to referrals for work, that's led to clients, um, that's led to just inspiration. People felt a bit stuck, and so they got some ideas by talking to somebody else. Travel advice even. So sometimes the walkers say, oh, I'm going to be traveling here next month. And one of the other walkers says, oh, I can't believe it. That's where I'm from. I can give you some recommendations. So they have a whole itinerary ready by the end of the walk. So there's just so many positive things that comes from it. And just really just the small things that really I find incredible. Like I have a walker who is running her own business and she's got a lot on. She does things single-handedly and she suffers from migraines. And there was one morning that she came onto the walk and she said, oh, I've been having a really bad week the previous week. I feel really tired. I had a bad migraine. But because I'd signed up to the walk, I knew you'd be waiting for me. So I thought I just made that extra effort to get out of bed. And she came. And at the end of the walk, I just looked at her and her whole face demeanor had changed. She was energized, she was motivated. She said that was the best decision, making that extra effort to come out on the walk. And it's just those moments that are really special for me. It's not the big stuff. Yeah, of course, getting work, getting a referral, having a podcast collaboration is great. But it's the beauty of those little things, that making that extra effort to get out of bed because you were having a bad week. I think that for me is really special.
Again, a lot of that really resonates with me. I suffer from severe migraines and I have all my life. And it kind of comes back to that nature prescription piece as well. So if I'm having a really severe migraine, unless it's super, super sunny, I try to get outside and up here in Scotland, I find it so much more prescriptive in the sense that it's so much better because if I tried to get outside down south, it would be noisy, it would be smelly, or everything that you don't want when you've got a migraine would be pummeling your senses. Whereas up here, it's the sound of nature, it's, the smell of actual fresh air, natural light. And the other thing you mentioned there as well is the idea of, there is a lot of psychology around the benefits of reminiscence of positive memories. And like you said, the people that come on these walks, they'll go away and they'll think about and remember either an experience or a moment, or whether it's the rainbow or whether it's a conversation, and they can relive those positive memories and have similar reactions to them 1 2 days later, 3 days later, a week, 2 weeks, months later. And I think there are so many benefits to that, and to kind of helping people to kind of really tap into that. So it's not just in that moment, it's not just on that walk and talk session, it's what's the ripple effect that carries on through their day, their week, their month. And then the excitement, I guess, it generates to come on the next one, because they're like, the last one was brilliant. I had some great conversations, experienced some wonderful scenery, met some great people, had some amazing insights. I want to do it again. And I think, really exploring that, and seeing, what the benefits are, and how people really tap into that after the event as well. And and anybody else who's listening who does suffer from migraines, there's another really interesting piece of research that's just been done around cold water submersion, full body, head and everything, cold water submersion, and apparently it really helps with migraines because it helps to open up the blood vessels. And yeah, so there's a lot of that going on in Scotland at the moment as well. Wild swimming, which I don't do, in the loch that's in the picture in the back behind me. But yeah, nature does provide for us when we need it, especially from a mental health and physical health perspective. So, now Anna mentioned a minute ago about the difference between individual coaching or individual walk and talk and group, and that kind of the being able to manage the environment and manage the sort of practicalities of it. And that's not the only practicality, obviously, that you have to manage, which is probably a little bit different to us over here. So you mentioned a bit about the rain. And so I guess weather practicalities in Singapore are slightly different to the weather practicalities we have over here. Can you just maybe sort of share a little bit around what your planning and your preparation is for your walk and talks? What kind of aspects do you have to kind of think about beforehand, and not just prep for yourself, but also for your guests who come on it? And then in the moment as well, when you're on the walk and talks, what's the kind of practicalities that you need to be thinking about?
Yeah. I think we're quite lucky here because the climate's quite consistent. The weather is not really changeable that much. I mean, it's generally very sunny, very hot, and very humid. So there are times in the day that you just avoid, like you never go and walk in the middle of the day. You just don't do it. So I'm only working really with two slots of the day. It's either really early in the morning, although I have tried getting walkers out at 7, but that's proving very difficult. So the sweet spot seems to be 8 o'clock. So 8 to 9 is when we walk. After 9, forget it. You're really gonna start sweating and feeling very yeah, just very dehydrated. So 8 to 9 is when I walk, and that obviously the timing is a consideration. In the evening, it would be something around 6. So it gets dark here every day at regardless of the month at 7:15 in the evening. So if I wanted to do a walk, then I in the evening, which I am thinking of, well, I'm planning to do that. I was only doing morning walks, but I'm now planning to do evening to try and get the corporates involved. So the ones that work in the city. So I'd do that 6 till 7 and then go for a drink after, just before it gets dark. Um, I suppose the other practical considerations here is just reminding people, especially if they're new to Singapore, to bring water. So keep hydrated, mosquito spray. So when we go into places that are a bit more jungle, so covered with trees, then there's lots of mosquitoes. So just be mindful of that. Sun protection as well. So just reminding people about, yeah, just taking care of themselves in the sun and the humidity. Um, and also being quite mindful of, I don't want people to feel exhausted after it, because this is at the morning and people are busy for the rest of the day. So it wants to set them up for the day and be energizing and not exhausting. So in terms of where I go, I kind of go where it's not too strenuous. I think, and Singapore's pretty flat. I think there's only like one or two, I don't even think you can call them mountains, larger hills. So I just make sure that people are, going at a pace that's comfortable for the slowest walker, so that it's all inclusive. Um, and then just checking in every so often to just see if the pace is okay, because I do try and encourage everyone to stay as a big group. And also not having too many walkers in one session. So I cap it at 20. And there's one location that I go to that always seems to have a waiting list, but I always hit 20. but most of the time on an average, the group is around, what would I say, 5 to 8 walkers. So it's pretty intimate. Yeah, so just being really mindful of, yeah, their physical well-being, and also being mindful of toilets and breaks and things like that, all those practical things. Uh, yeah, I think that's about it in terms of making sure. Oh, and in terms of like routes, I pretty much know I'm familiar with the routes of all the locations so that people don't have to worry about that. But in Singapore, if you've been here for a while, you tend to be an Eastie or a Westie. And I'm an Eastie. I live on the East and always have done over the 15 years. So when I kind of venture out west, which seems ridiculous because it's very small, but venturing out west is a big jump. And I feel out of my comfort zone. Um, but I have walkers that are from the west and they want to go to different locations. Um, and so that's about me just kind of saying, okay, I'm not familiar with this area. So letting someone else lead, which they're quite happy to do. But making sure that the group knows that at the beginning, like this is not an area that I'm familiar with, but I've already prepared with someone else who is going to lead the group. And it's interesting to see how people react to that. I mean, sometimes I go to locations and I am making it up as I go. And I call that out at the beginning. I say, this is one of those locations that I'm really familiar with. Um, so you're not going to get lost. I'll know when the hour is up because I've got a very good internal clock, but I'm just going to see where my feet take me. Um, and there'll be people that are constantly saying, oh, which way are we going next? Do we know where we're going? And then there'll be those that are just quite happy to follow along. So that's been quite interesting to observe the different reactions to that. Yeah.
And these practicalities, whether you're working with one person or a group, are so important to really work through beforehand. And particularly with group, the dynamics between a group that's 8 to 20, like it's a totally different kettle of fish. And managing that. And I think the point that I'd just really like to just zoom in on, it's this piece around, whether you're working with a group or whether you're working one-on-one, who is planning the route? Who is the leader? Who is the guide? And actually, how then does that impact the conversation? And particularly if you're then having a coaching conversation, how does that dynamic, whether it's conscious or unconscious, the unseen, unspoken power, how does that influence? And it's one of these, I really don't want to label anything as right or wrong. This is just part of the exploration as a coach and the style of coaching and your approach and the structure and your philosophy as you start to move towards it, that you come to something that fits, that's authentic to you. And that might change as well. And I think that's part of the beauty of it as we go through our coaching journey and explore and evolve. Yeah, so taking a little bit of a segue onto a slightly different topic, because we don't think we've had any other fellow podcasters on yet. I don't know, Alex, correct me if I'm wrong. So just bringing that into center stage, and you recently started your own podcast, and just a little, what does that bring to your work?
Well, I would say first and foremost, a lot of learning. So for me, it's like a way that I can get my professional development in because I don't work for an organization. So I use it as my personal and professional development. So I learn probably more and as much from it as the guests do. And I've been really fortunate to have amazing guests on. Um, and I'm kind of really proud that the latest series spotlighting Singaporean professionals, so people based here. So, I've spent 15 years on this sunny island, but I think for about 3 seasons, I was kind of looking outwards, and they came from all different places all over the world. But this series, I've just concentrated on the people that I share this island with, and that's been really great. So yeah, just learning about their stories. Um, I've had authors on there, so just learning about their process, how they write, how they, just resources that are out there that I might not have been aware of, because there's so much out there now that it's a great way to curate my own kind of bank of resources. Um, so yeah, I would say that like first and foremost, it's learning for me, personally and professionally. Second of all, it's honing my craft, it's honing my skills. My LinkedIn profile says I'm a communication specialist. So if I'm not really holding space and conversing and asking questions and listening and showing all of those skills in a very tangible way, which is this podcast, then I feel like I'm not going back to walking, I'm not walking the talk. So it's a way of just honing that craft, holding conversation, rapport building. It's just there's so many skills involved in hosting a podcast, as I'm sure you've learned as well. There's so much that goes on behind the scenes. So um, yeah, it really leverages on all the skills. Um, not so much my editing skills because I don't really like it. So like you, I have somebody that does that for me. But in terms of just like hosting the conversations, um, yeah, it's just been a privilege. There's so much learning that comes from it. Yeah.
Exactly how Anna and I sort of view this podcast. For us, it's our passion project, and the fact that other people are passionate about our passion project, it's mind-boggling, and it's wonderful, and it makes it so special for us, because we knew that there was a sort of a niche out there, and we knew there were people, and we knew that there was a network that could be built and created, and we just wanted to sort of help and facilitate that. And I think you're right, it's about walking the talk. So yes, we're coaches, we're outdoor coaches, but a lot of the conversations we have with our clients are about how do they first of all challenge themselves to do something different, step out of their comfort zone, and how do they connect with people in a different way, or network, etc. So utilizing those skills as well, but also identifying where we don't have a skill set, and to learn that skill set would have taken us some time. And it really was a barrier to doing podcasts in the past, because just the editing part is just not our skill set. But luckily my husband sees The Matrix, so he's quite happy to just sit there and play with videos for hours, and it's done, and it looks amazing. So I think that's a really, it's a really great way of just opening a topic up and then just seeing where it goes and just going with it and going with the flow. And meeting amazing people all over the world. And that's one of the things I love most about podcasts is, we have met people from, all over the US, all over Europe, parts of Asia. We're still trying to find somebody in Africa. We've had somebody from Australia. We're looking. We're all over the place, and we really love that. And one of the things you mentioned there is about resources and curating. And I have to say, the bookcase that I've got behind me, which you can't see on my image, but I love your bookcase, Lisa. My bookcase is now full of books that have been recommendations from some of our guests. There's all sorts on there, from, like I mentioned, The Oak Papers by James Canton, all the way through to things like Braiding Sweetgrass, and all sorts of books that I would never necessarily have heard of or found, but they are integral now to our community, and we're sharing them with so many of our podcast guests, are talking about them, and they come up time and time again. So what kind of resources would you share? What kind of recommendations would you make to our listeners for resources that they could use around the walking and talking space, or nature, connection, that sort of thing? What resources can you recommend?
Well, I was very, very lucky, fortunate. Now, this is a story. I was in a library, in a public library here in Singapore, and I was waiting for my daughter to finish her tuition. And I was just browsing the shelves, and this book just leapt out at me. It was the image on the front cover. It was a fire, a campfire, big flame in the middle. And I looked a bit closer, and it just drew me to it. I just could not stop looking at it. I picked it up, and the title was The Creativity Factor by Gary Pratt. And I was like, hold on. Then I looked inside. I was like, this sounds like it's really meant for me. It was like it still gives me goosebumps. I never went into the library with the intention of borrowing a book. It just leapt out at me. And I picked it up, took it home, read it probably in like a couple of days, um, shut it and thought, okay, I host a podcast, take a deep breath. Could I invite him to come and speak with me? Like, could I tell him this story of finding his book in the library and for him to say yes? Because this was at a time when I hadn't been doing the walk and talks that long. And I was like really trying to find things that would support this crazy idea that this is a good idea to come and have a walk. And like, what is the evidence? What's the science that backs this up? And this book had it all in it. I was like, I wonder if he'd say yes. So I kind of took a deep breath and sent him an email just explaining that you never guess what, I'm in Singapore and I saw this book on the library shelf and so on. And he replied within a day and said, yeah, I would love to come. That is a fantastic story. I'm just so happy that someone in Singapore has gone to the library and picked up my book. When can I come on? So I ended up interviewing him and it was amazing. So one resource I would definitely recommend, and I know you've recommended this as well, is The Creativity Factor by Gary Pratt. The other one, again, I think you know this as well, Coaching Outdoors by Leslie Roberts. I've done 2 of her courses now, and that's helped me kind of add to my craft of hosting these outdoor events. And another shout out to a fellow walker and talker in the UK who I connected with over LinkedIn and was in one of the courses that Leslie Roberts ran, who is called Ellie Lloyd-Jones, and she runs Elevate Networking. And we've kind of had many a conversation. We've connected over Zoom a couple of times since doing the course, just to kind of support each other in this work, and exchange resources. Yeah, so she shout out to her, and if I'm ever in the UK, I'll definitely try to go on her walks or at least co-create something with her. So yeah, but, I suppose the only other book I'd recommend that's been helpful in terms of my facilitation, I've just spotted it, look up here in the corner, is by a lady called Priya Parker. She's a facilitator in the US, and she wrote this book called The Art of Gathering. And it's just been hugely helpful in terms of how you hold space, how you put that container, how you balance structure versus something that comes out organically, and how you kind of reflect and summarize any outcomes. So she's really, really been helpful with the facilitation part of conversations. There's probably a lot more, but I'll stop there.
Oh, I just love that moment of serendipity with you and Gary's book. That is the bigger universe just giving you a little nudge. We've got your back. Go for it. And yeah, having had Gary as a guest on this podcast, just yeah, I'm not surprised by his response. And indeed, I think when you're an author of your book and you're birthing this book and writing a book is just a process beyond me. And someone recognizes and invests the time to read it, then yeah, wow. And both Gary and Leslie will be at our event. We're recording this at the beginning of July, our inaugural event in partnership with Henley Business School, which is just beyond our wildest dreams. So literally in just over a week's time. So we're finalizing that. So yeah, we're going to have Gary and Leslie, and I think Ellie is coming as well. So it's going to be a real gathering, and that really fuels a lot of the passion behind this podcast. It's the community, and that almost kind of brings full circle back to your earliest memory in the oak tree and how that brought everybody together. So, you know, the outdoor coaching community is growing, it is vibrant. This is an exciting time to be a part of it, because everybody has a part to play, everybody listening in, like, you are all part of this journey. And actually, when we look back 5 years ago, where were we? A few outliers kind of shouting in the storm, and we're far more connected now. So what can the next 5 or 10 years bring, I think, is just super exciting. So Lisa, where can our listeners discover more about your work and connect?
So I'm on LinkedIn, so Lisa Partridge. So I have my own profile, and then I have a page on a company page called SIXCOMMS, all one word. My website, sixcomms.org. I'm on Instagram, which I have 2 accounts actually. I have a separate one for the podcast, SIXCOMMS podcast, and then just my own. So I think I can never remember the handles of these things, but I'm sure you'll put it in the description notes. So Instagram, website, LinkedIn, all of those.
It's funny, isn't it? There's so many socials now. It's like, how on earth? I can never remember any of them either. So I always have to go and search myself so I can remember what my handles are. But thank you so much, Lisa. I mean, it's just it's a slightly different topic. You know, we have talked about some walks and talks in the past, but it's just really nice to come back to this topic again and just look at the connection with the outdoors in a different lens, in a different focus. With groups, you know, and understanding it, also having, you know, the insight from a different part of the world as well. I've spent some amazing times in Asia, especially around in South Korea and Seoul. It's one of my favorite places in the world, and you know, it's just listening to you talk. I know, as you said, the cultures are probably very different actually, but it just reminded me of Asia and spending some wonderful times there. So thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. We really appreciate it. And I love the Gary Pratt story there. He will love it as well when he reads watches this, or when we tell him when we see him next week as well. So
I'm often tagging him. I think he gets fed up with me. I tag him on everything.
It's all about especially LinkedIn, it's all about LinkedIn algorithms.
It's all about that.
But yes,
by the way, can I just say how jealous I am that you're holding the Henley event, and I would so want to be there. I'm just too far away. So if you ever want to do something similar in this part of the world, I'll be there. I'll help.
Henley Business School does have campuses in Asia, so you never know. You never know. There is
put
option.
that out there now.
There might be something to co-event there. But yes, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your experiences with us. And hopefully one day we will get to meet you. If you do come back to the UK at any point, please do let us know. And to our listeners and our followers, connect with Lisa, find out more about what she does, and not just in the walk and talk space, but also in the SIXCOMMS space as well, because there's some great stuff in there. And you know, please follow her podcast. It's really interesting topics, which I think we can all benefit from as well. And so thank you from us. Thank you for that's a wrap for another Coaching Outdoors podcast episode. If this is your first time to join us, we have a huge back catalogue. We're in season 8 now of our Coaching Outdoors podcast, and so that means we've got over 70 podcast episodes for you to delve into and enjoy. on our website, www.coaching-outdoors.com. And please join the LinkedIn community as well if you're not already joined up. And as Anna said, if you're listening to this, actually, we'll already have had our event, our Coaching Outdoors live event at Henley Business School, but there will be lots and lots and lots of things to watch and look at and read post-event as well. So if you couldn't make it in person, you will be able to share some of the amazing insights that I know we're going to get from the event. We're very excited. So thank you once again, Lisa. Thank you from me, and thank you from Anna Marie as well.
And just putting it out there, because we're putting things out there, you know, Singapore, Henley Business School 2025. So you first heard it here, maybe.
So if you enjoyed what you've heard, like it, share across your network, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and LinkedIn community page, the Coaching Outdoor Podcast. Thanks so much in advance for your support.